Thank you. Thank you. Let's all give Steve a big hand for this Catfish Conference. How awesome is that? He's the man. I appreciate all you guys showing up. This is awesome to see this. You know, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to make it, and Captain Jackson was going to step in and do the seminar for me, and had some stuff turned for the good, so I was able to make it, and he was gracious enough to let me come up, and we're going to tag team this thing. So it might be a little awkward at times, but we're here. We're going to probably give you guys a lot of good and bad information. You probably have to weed through most of it, but you might come out with something at the end. I'm Captain Ryan Casey. I run Show Me Catfish and Trophy Guide Service in St. Louis, Missouri. I guide on the Mississippi and Missouri River for Trophy Bluecats. And this is Captain Jason Jackson. I'll let him introduce himself.
I'm Captain Jason Jackson. I guide in St. Louis, Missouri. I own Two Rivers Guide Service. I guide on Missouri and Mississippi rivers as well. We're both from 50 miles of each other, so we fish a lot together.
We fished a lot of tournaments back in the day. This was actually one of my first tournament partners, and he's a good fisherman. And between us both, you guys might actually get one or two pieces of good information. But he put together a heck of a PowerPoint presentation, and we're going to go over tips, techniques, tactics on catching these big blue cats in river situations in current. And that's what we specialize in. We catch flatheads and channels as well, but we specialize in the blue cats. And if you want to go ahead and flip that and see what our first talking point is here.
It's all topics. It talks about all
topics.
There you go.
Go ahead, Jackson.
Go ahead and flip through it. Hit it a couple times. So we're going to talk about patterns and seasonal change, water levels, fishing a rise and a fall. Go ahead. Structure, what are we looking at? What are we looking for? Current, fast, slow, breaks, slow current, eddies. Types of bait, quality of bait, catching bait, storm bait, everything to do with bait. And techniques, anchor fishing. We're going to talk about some drift fishing, some bumping, some suspend drifting.
Let's talk about patterns and seasonal change.
And conservation. So go ahead and let's talk about the patterns.
Is that what our first one is?
Yep.
I have no idea how PowerPoint works, guys. I'm just a simple fisherman, so.
Head it off.
Seasonal patterns. Like right now, we're dealing with really cold water. Our water temperature on the Mississippi River is 34 degrees, and the Missouri River is 35 right now. So the catfish are really slow, they're sluggish, and they're typically wintered up. There's a lot of misconceptions in catfishing, and they're not misconceptions per se, but a lot of people, you got to find the deepest water this time of year. And that's not always necessarily true. A lot of times these catfish, they will be around some of your deeper holes, but I find a lot of times catfish this time of year in 25 foot or less water. In the morning time, I will start off, and if any of you are familiar with the Missouri River, we have a lot of trail dikes and dikes. And these fish will stage up in the slower water. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the right amount of current, whether it be a back eddy or slack water, actually. And these fish, they may be kind of schooled up in the slacker, deeper water in the mornings, and then they will actually get out and move a little bit, especially if it's a nice sunny day, and they'll get up and they'll be in the flats, and those are your more active fish. So patterns this time of year, with the blue cats, I'm looking more for current speed than I am depth a lot of times. And you're going to have to hunt a lot of these different dikes until you find the one that's actually holding your schools of fish. And on the Missouri River, you know, one of the biggest questions I get is, Ryan, how can you tell what's a catfish from all these Asian carp and everything else in there? And that takes time. That's tricky, because if you've been out there, they'll black out a fish finder a lot of times. So what I'm looking for a lot of times when I'm in those holes in that slack water and you've got fish everywhere is I'm looking for, it's kind of an educated guess. I'm looking for those three fish that are facing, and there's always a little bit of current. I don't care, there's a back eddy or something coming through there. I'm looking for those fish that are facing into the current, and I'm looking for those fish that are in usually a smaller, tighter group. Now, don't be afraid to fish the big balls of Asian carp and fish underneath them, because those catfish will be laying underneath those a lot of times. And sometimes you go in a spot and there's a lot of life, you know, anchor up and try it out. And you're going to have to sit a little bit. That's another thing that's seasonal pattern this time of year, is you're going to want to sit on those fish a little bit longer, because those fish are a little more lethargic. It's going to take them a little bit they get the smell, and they're going to get up and get active enough to come and bite that. And you're going to have to be a little more patient with the bite, because it's not as aggressive. So, I mean, you know, you're really going to have to let them kind of take it. It's frustrating. But You know, that's one of the biggest things this time of year is finding those fish on the fish finder and deciphering what's catfish and what's Asian carp or gar or drum or buffalo. And I look for fish that are kind of, you know, you'll have 3 or 4 or 5 of them. They're all facing one direction. You know, Asian carp, you'll see them, you'll have echoes, you know, facing every which way, you know.
In different depths.
In different depths, yeah. And I mean, it can be frustrating to find, but you start to, and you know, some of you run Humminbird, Lowrance, Garmin, they're all great units. You know, catfish, you know, it's more of an educated guess, but you can see color patterns and know, hey, you know, this is what a catfish looks like when I'm drifting and I see them come up and they hit the bait, and you know that's what a catfish looks like most of the time. And you know, you can kind of decipher on each unit what that mark looks like, but it gets a little overwhelming when you're in those pockets with all those Asian carp. So that's one of mine, and then we can go into spring.
And what about the bite? The bite in the wintertime is usually not as aggressive. No. They have a lot more softer tip on our rods because the fish are really mouthing the baits. They can feel the pressure on your rods. And I don't use the same action of rod year round. I use a lot of a softer action rod in the wintertime because that fish isn't aggressively biting that bait. They're more focused on getting the bait, put it in their mouth, and they can feel that rod pressure, and a lot of times they'll drop that bait.
Yep.
We actually have a rod up here, different of it, but is there a kid in the crowd that wants to help us?
A little man right there looks.
Help us?
Oh, he's
help
not
us?
ready.
Who wants to hold a rod?
How about that?
There you go. How you stood up? You got it. So on these, I have a medium action rod here.
That's the best mustache on a kid I've ever seen.
It's a lot smaller, a lot less than what some of the medium heavies and heavy rods have. And a lot of guys that I talk to run the same rod, same action, same years. That's it. That's what they like. And that's great. But when these fish are biting in a slow pattern like this, especially in the winter months, they're going to feel that pressure on a hard tip rod, especially a medium heavy or a heavy rod. And as soon as they feel that pressure, most of the time they're going to drop that bait. Anybody channel cat fish in here? What do channel cat do when they feel pressure? They drop the bait. That's why channel cat rods have such a soft tip on them. So using a different action rod, seasonal, and even in the summertime when you have a slow bite, going to a medium action rod or even a medium light rod is not a bad idea. It's just something else to put in your arsenal whenever you're chasing, you know, slow biting fish. Yeah,
absolutely. And another thing you can do is even with a light tip rod, you know, I use the TWC whisker whips, and Jackson uses the Big Cat Fevers. They're all great rods. It's awesome to see all these, you know, companies supporting catfishing. But even with a light rod, a lot of times these blues will pick it up and they'll drop it. And what you can do is put your rod in a 0-degree position and turn the clicker on and the bail open and let them just take it. And I have very little patience. That's why I fish for Bluecat. And I know that's crazy to hear from a guy who fishes for a living, but that's why I chase Bluecats. They're aggressive usually, but when they're not, letting them, you know, opening that bail up and using a soft tip rod, these things will put more fish in the boat for you, especially in the winter time. And there's times when they're finicky in the fall and everything else, but
you're good, man. You can have it. Appreciate it. Thanks for helping us.
Still the best mustache I've ever seen on a kid.
All right, spring.
Spring? You know, moving forward into spring, you know, I always use kind of 38 to, you know, 40, 45 degrees. Those fish really start getting out of the holes that they've been wintering in, and they start moving around. They get up around the dikes, and they're up in the rocks, and they're just moving. They're not schooled up as much anymore. And, you know, I transition a lot of times to flats and fishing above the dikes as well. And still in the mornings, a lot of times I'm pushed up, you know, into the edges of the deeper holes and things like that. But then I'm definitely moving out into a little more current, even on the outsides of the trail dikes and on the bottom sides of the trail dikes. If you guys know what a trail dike is, there's the Corps of Engineers puts these rock structures into the river, and what that does is it forces water into the middle of the river to keep the middle of that river clear of sediment and debris. And so these rock structures are great fish habitat. And so a trail dike is a dike that comes out towards the middle of the river and then runs like an L downstream. All right? And so the outside of that trail dike and the bottom side of it in the spring is a great place where those fish will start coming. The rocks warm up a little faster. There's bait fish in there and crustaceans, and they're in there and they're actively feeding. And that's a great area to target fish moving in towards the spring. A little more current. You're still not in that fast water, but you're in the secondary seam. There's a current rolling off the end of that dike that actually kicks out about 10 foot, 15 foot from where that dike comes downstream, and that's slower water in there. There's a pocket of slower water, and those fish will collect in there a lot of times. It's a great place to look in the spring when the water temperature is 42, 45, 48 degrees. When it starts getting 50, that's when we start moving in more towards our drifting and back bouncing, bumping, whatever you guys want to call it. Got a rod in the hand, and we're out there, searching for those fish that are really starting to move, because these fish will travel. They'll come up the river long distances. Yep. And I feel like I'm hogging this, so jump in.
Oh, no, absolutely not. No. How far was that one tag from Kansas City? Remember that?
Yeah, we tagged, well, they actually caught one down in Memphis and caught it in Kansas City. So, these fish will travel large distances. You can follow on Facebook. That's one of the things that was such a neat tool when Facebook came out, was all your friends throughout the country, and you can start watching them catching fish down in Memphis or what have you, and they're coming up and they're following the bait up, towards Alton in the spring. And our bite steady picks up, out throughout the river. So you could kind of follow that. And then in the fall, when our water temperature starts dropping out, you could follow it back downstream. Not all fish travel. They've done, some tagging studies and things like that. But a good population of the blues are very nomadic and they travel. So springtime, you got to be a little more versatile. You don't have to look as much for that special dike that's holding those fish, because they're going to be scattered out a little more. But really targeting and putting the pattern together. If I had to say one thing about Bluecats is you can go out there in a day and the pattern will change, but finding that depth of water, that current speed, if they're on wood or rock, or if they're on sand or mud, those are things you kind of got to put those pieces together while you're out there. And they're a really versatile fish. They're a challenging fish. Most of you who fish for them know. Those suckers, they'll make you scratch your head on your best day and so that's springtime. And then anybody have any questions on spring or winter? 'Cause I know I'm trying to fly through this and all that, but yes, sir. So he's asking about the trail dikes. They come out into the middle of the river. If you can imagine the river coming downstream this way, they come out towards the middle of the river, and then they come downstream, and that's an L dike. When the current hits the front of it, and it rolls off the side because it's hitting with such force, and it rolls out about 15 foot usually. And there's a little bit of slower and backwater right in there, and that follows all the way down behind it too.
And there's a lot of big scour holes when the water's over it too.
Exactly.
So,
you can anchor above it, or you can anchor right inside of it, or a lot of times push your boat right up in the rocks and kind of put the anchor on the upstream side, or if there's a back eddy, the opposite way, and fish the back current, towards the front of the dike. There's a lot of different currents and that come into play there. But however you do it, you find where the fish are sitting on there with your electronics, and you set up accordingly. You always want to be on the upstream side of them, casting back to them. And always cast, you want to be short of the fish, Always be careful. That Missouri River will eat a lower unit. Absolutely. Springtime's one of my favorites. Once we start moving baits and moving the boat, drifting is an extremely effective way to catch fish, because you're covering more water. You're putting that bait in front of more fish. If you're anchored up on a spot, you're fishing back to those fish or any fish that might possibly be moving. When you're drifting, you're taking it to a whole group of fish down a whole, bank or seam or ledge. So you're covering a lot more water. You're getting in front of a lot more fish. And there's a lot of different kind of variations on how to drift. But one of the main things I can't stress enough is boat control. I see a lot of guys out there when you're drifting, their boat is rocking, back and forth like this. And what's happening is those baits are moving as well, side to side in the current. Now a fish down there in 40 foot of water in the Mississippi River, he can't see. You're going, and a good rule of thumb is about half the speed of the current. In the spring when it's colder, you want to be even slower than that. And why that's effective is you're slowing it down to where that bait's scent is going back to that fish. And he might be sitting in a little depression or a hump and he can smell that bait coming. He can't see it, but he's moving like a shark, and he's looking for that scent, and it goes out in a cone, all right? And he's in that cone trying to narrow down where that bait is. And if your boat's going side to side, there's a better chance that he's going to miss that bait. He's probably not going to chase it downstream, especially in cold water, because they're not that active. So boat control is key. And I'm going to slow that bait down and get that scent in front of that fish, and they're going to feed up. So a lot of times I'm using this stacker rig, or you can call it a Kentucky rig, or whatever you like. It's a super easy rig to tie. It takes me no time, and I'll show anybody at the end of this how to tie this rig. But basically what you have is a weight on the bottom, and I use loop knots so I can change my weight out just that fast. And then I've got 2 hooks up above it, all right? And I use the double action Team Catfish 8/0 hooks, and I've used them for a long time. They're great hooks. Jackson uses Daiichi's, a very similar hook. But that rig right there, you drop that down, all right? And I use a lot of times my 10-foot Whisker Whip XLs, and I'm ticking the bottom. And sometimes I've got it just a little off the bottom. But the weight is very important on this presentation, because you don't want it way back behind the boat. You want it pretty much as straight up and down as you can get it, and you want it down there ticking bottom, and you want to pay attention to your fish finder to where those fish are in relation to the bottom, because sometimes they're hugging the bottom in the mud, and sometimes they're 3-4 foot up off the bottom. But a blue cat will almost always feed up, all right? And so, I always put one, start off usually about 10, 11 inches up from the weight, and then my next one, I've usually got it pretty close, and as the day goes on, the fish usually tend to come up a little more, and I might have it 3 to 4 foot, and this one might be 12 inches to 2 foot up off the bottom. And I vary that. And I also vary my weight. That people always ask me on my live feeds, how much weight are you using? And I hardly ever tell them, because it's important. That's one little trick you got to kind of figure out on your own, is how much weight to use to keep the presentation correct. It's just like if you're in a river and you're fly fishing for trout, all right? And you're, I'm getting kind of off, but you want to have a natural flow. You don't want drag on your float, because if you got that drag, it's not a natural presentation. Same thing, you're using your boat as the float. You want to make sure that you're going slower than the current. You don't want that bait fluttering and back there. You want it straight up and down and presented kind of natural and rolling on the bottom. You got anything to add to that, Jackson?
No, you got it.
But this rig right here, it will catch you a lot of fish. You got 2 baits in the water, and one thing I can't stress enough that most people overlook is one of the little things is how you cut your bait, all right? Most people have, they cut their bait and they don't think twice about it. How you cut it and how you hook it is very important. Like, let's say I'm cutting off a fillet, all right? A lot of people will just take and hook that old fillet on, and they've got, they're hooking it 2 inches back. Well, that flap in front of that bait that you've got now, it's got a flap folded over. Everybody with me on that? That flap's going to sit there and make that bait go like this. That's not natural. There's nothing down there helicoptering, and it's also going to twist your line up. That's not a natural presentation. So, I'm hooking it just on the edge of that flap, and that'll give you that nice, it's going downstream, fluttering, and looking good. It's going to look good to the fish. A lot of people hook their heads, and they'll hook them through the nostrils, and the mouth's open. And that mouth's open, and it's spinning. Now, I don't mind a slow wobble. I'll put almost every bait I got, I'll put it down in the water and see how it's going to. If it's sitting there doing that, I'm going to rehook it. Because you're not fishing the way you should be. And that's just one of those little things that's going to help you put a lot more fish in the boat. And always check for that scale on the end of that hook. If you're not, you're costing yourself. We've all done it. All of us have done it. But that's one of those things that just drives me crazy. If I lose a big fish and there's a dang scale on the end of that hook, I want to break something. Because that's something that could easily be overdone. But how you hook your bait and how you cut it. Skipjack, I almost always take one fillet off the side, and then I'll chunk it up, or I might take the gut pocket out and use the gut pocket and hook it in the V on the bottom where it's real rigid. And if you're using big baits, put that stinger hook back there, because, man, there's nothing worse than coming back with half your skipjack mangled up and you're hooking, you didn't get the fish. Yeah. We've all been there.
That goes with anchoring, too. If you're anchoring in high current with your mouth open, you're not going to get your bait on the bottom. There's constantly going to be flow going into that fish's mouth. Or if you have a fillet out there, it's totally spinning. So it's totally catching friction every time it's on the bottom. Bait's never going to totally settle on the bottom until you maybe run your whole spool out. So if you're back there, your line's on the bottom, your rod's doing this, half the time your baits came unhooked, your mouth's open on your bait, or your bait's catching current from somewhere. And so that doesn't even, that bait cutting's not only been anchor or drift fishing, but also anchor fishing.
Yeah, and you know, another technique when the water starts to warm up is, you know, we're anchor fishing, the water temperature's getting 50 degrees or so. And Bluecats like a moving bait, especially if they're going to get active, you know, and when that water starts warming up a little bit, those fish will get active. And from an anchor position, you can start walking baits. You know, you know, you just, what you want to do, and the weight is what's key here, and the size of the bait. You want to get your presentation just so to where you're picking it up and you can walk it back, you know, 3 to 5 foot, let it sit there for a minute. Sometimes I even put it in the holder and walk it back, and I use line counter reels, you know, so I put a waypoint usually where my fish or structure is, and I want to walk baits to that structure, put it in the holder, start walking another bait back to it, and get it. I want to get enough weight to where I get it back to, let's say I'm 130 foot above the structure. I want to be able to walk it back to 130 foot and sit it in the holder and have that weight on the bottom and not floating up off the bottom. And I want to have the right amount of weight to be able to walk it back to 130 foot. So finding out what weight you need is something you got to play with. It's nice to have these loop rigs. You can change it out, walk it back. You know, you walk it back to 130 foot right in front of that structure, put it in the holder, walk another one back. These gentlemen were out with me. We were walking baits last year, and it's a lot of fun, isn't it, guys? Yeah. I mean, you know, you pick it up a lot of times just to move it, and that fish will hit it right there. You're holding the rod, and it's a lot of fun. But these fish like a little bit of movement in their bait when that water temperature starts warming up, and that's one of my favorite tactics in the fall as well. And you can really pick apart a piece of structure that when you're drifting, you know, let's say you've got, I'll usually do it if there's 3 or 4 more big fish sitting on a piece of structure or a whole pile of fish. You know, you can anchor up and really pick those fish apart instead of drifting past them and not, you know, covering those fish like you need to.
And it also helps whenever you're fishing heavy cover, like a spot you normally couldn't drift, you can anchor on and walk those baits through it. There's a lot of ledges, rock piles, stuff like that you're not going to drift through. You're going to lose every hook in your boat. So anchoring on them, getting precise where they are, and walking that one bait down into that hole in front of that tree and behind that boulder, it's another tactic to be able to get on them fish accurately without getting hung up every seconds.
You're still going to hang some up. Always going to hang them up. But you know, off of anchor, I feel more confident in catching bigger fish a lot of times than I do drifting, because those fish live there. You know, that's what I do when I'm fishing that heavy structure. And even in the summertime, you know, you're anchoring up above that structure and moving baits, and you can really pick something apart where those big fish live a little more than you can just drifting right through it. So, you know, everybody wants to know about back bouncing, bumping, and all that, and that's kind of the next stage when the water warms up and you've got the rod in your hand. And, you know, that's something that's really hard to teach someone in a day because it's so much of a feel situation. And what you want is you want a good, light, you know, rod that's sensitive, you know, graphite or carbon or some kind of composite in that area. And you want something that feels good in your hand that you can hold all day. One of the most important things about bumping or back bouncing is the amount of weight that you use. It's the same thing. You know, your boat control and the amount of weight to keep your presentation natural. And the way I like to describe it is these fish are used to stuff coming down the river and feeding at a moving bait. And they're usually sitting in behind a drop. And a lot of times in our rivers, you know, there's sand, there's mud, and there's, you know, silt. And those bottoms, if you ever cook bacon on one of them things in the microwave where it kind of comes up, drops off, comes up, drops off, that's a lot of what our river is out there, the bottom. And a lot of flats and areas like that. And these fish will sit. The more active ones I found are usually right at the top. They rise right at the top of that fall. All right, that's where a lot of our active fish, they're waiting for something to come right there. But then once you get down into that hole, you have a lot of fish stacked up in there mostly. And sometimes those fish are actually facing downstream, because what happens with that current is it flows over that hump and comes back and hits this next hump and boils back like this and then shoots up. And you see those boils in the river. All right? Everybody know what I'm talking about? If you don't, I mean, you go out to the river and you'll see these boils like slick spots. So a lot of times you'll have a lot of fish sitting down there, and they're actually facing downstream. And when your boat goes over it, boat control is so key here, because a lot of times you're going to pick these more active fish off right away. And then you're going to start dealing on your second drift with these fish in the pockets and stuff like that. So when you go over that and you hit that rise come up, your boat's going to speed up. The hydrodynamics of it is shallower water, same current speed, same amount of pressure on your trolling motor. That shallower water, your boat will actually speed up. And then when you hit that drop, you're going to hit that slick spot and your boat's going to slow way down. So your presentation is going to be off. I'm on the trolling motor constantly. And that's one reason I'm going to pick up more fish than, guys. Yeah, well, how many did you catch? And I'll tell them, and they'll be like, oh, man, we fished right next to you all day. And it's boat control. It's such a big key aspect of what I do. You don't want that thing walking. You can look back and see somebody who's starting to drift and their boat's sideways half the time. And there's times where that's going to catch you some fish. But if you keep those baits straight and in line with those fish where they can smell it and have that chance, and then also with the right speed and you're not speeding up, slowing down, speeding up, slowing down where it doesn't look natural, and keeping that bait going, off of those drops and bringing it in front of those fish that might be sitting backwards, you're going to pick a lot more of those fish off on every drift. So boat control and keeping the bait where it needs to be in a presentation that the fish like, that's key in drifting. And then when you're walking baits as well, I mean, you have to feel that bottom. And the way I do it is a lot of guys will jig, and that's effective. I found for me in the fall a lot of times when those fish are a little, they're wary almost. I don't know if they've been beat up enough or what, but it's almost a reaction bite type situation. And I found that jigging in that time of year is a little better. But in the summer, early summer, spring, I want to just be able to drop it down and feel it hit the bottom, and I'm just going to lift it up a little bit. Now sometimes I'm lifting it up 3 foot. Off the bottom, and because they're up a little bit, and sometimes they're laying right in the mud, and I'm just lifting it up that much, and you want to be able to feel that rock, so you can lift it up over it, taking line up. You're constantly working that rod. I have so many people that just want to set it out there, and next thing you know, the thing's up here. Don't get frustrated. You're going to get hung up. You're going to have some of that. It's all about feel. You just want to get to where you can pick it up and feather it on that bottom. And when you feel that bite, that's a whole other animal getting that fish, getting the hooks in it, because so many people want to jerk, and that is the wrong thing to do, because you're setting a hook on slack. Most of the time these fish hit it so hard, you're still going at them, and so they're just picking something up and sitting right there, or there's a lot of slack in between them. So a lot of times if you just hold it, they'll start pulling off with it, and you go down with them and you just sweep back on them and start reeling, your hook set, because I use the double actions that way as well on that technique. The other option is you just reel down using your octopus or J hooks and cross some eyes. But it's whatever you like, and that technique is a lot of fun because, you get to set something that might set the hook back on you. I've almost been yanked out of the boat a couple times. I know I'm a real big guy and everything, but I've actually been sprawled out across the motor holding on for dear life.
Like that one fish at Wheeling.
Yeah.
When I was sleeping.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also when talking about the drifting weights, a lot of us use cannonball weights. Everybody knows a cannonball weight, it's round. We use cannonball weights because the surface area on the bottom of it gives us more feel. What's that weight right there? We're using like a bait sinker. There's not much there. So that weight's hitting the bottom, just that little hitting the bottom. And when you're using a cannonball, the whole bottom of it's hitting that water, or bottom, hitting structure, hitting rock, and it's not only giving you a better feel, but it's saving you from getting hung up. Saving you from knowing where you're at. If you know rocks, or you're on a ledge, or you're in a tree, this cannonball weight's got a bigger bottom on it, and it helps you. And a lot of it, we're talking about weights, is a lot of guys are scared to use a small weight because they got line going out of their reel. And I think some of the bigger fish that we catch bumping, our lines are 250, 300 foot behind the boat, because it gives it that more pressure-free presentation back there. You don't have a 8-ounce weight right below the boat. You're basically vertically jigging if you're using a heavy weight right behind the boat. And if you're doing vertical jigging, we're on a dead stick. A bumping technique back there, we have no pressure on our line, and the bait's in natural flow, flowing through the water column, more or less than a jigging motion where it's got a lot of pressure built up on it.
That's true, but at the same token, and that's right, once you get back there, but there are times where that bait straight down with a heavier weight, I took a guy out, and I'm like, a lot of people have a little trouble with this, and I'll I'll be darned if he didn't start kicking my butt, and the first fish was like 65 pounds. But I almost always start someone off with a heavier weight. It's going to give you more feel. You're going to be a little less frustrated when you start this out. If you use a heavier weight, you're going to get more contact with the bottom, and you're going to pick up the feel, and then you can start gradually going with lighter weights and getting a little farther back behind the boat. If you start off with that 2 or 3 ounce weight and you're 300-400 foot back, you don't have the feel yet. Trust me. I've gotten a chance to fish with some really good fishermen, and it's something that just takes a little time. Be patient, and don't try not to run before you walk. Use a little heavier weight, get the feel for it, progress yourself back with it, and you're going to enjoy it because it's a lot of fun. It's one of the funnest ways to catch these things, I promise you. In a river situation, for sure.
A quality rod too, though.
Good quality rod.
Remember what we started with?
Yeah, we started with Surge Elites. And
does anybody here know what a Surge Elite rod is? Anybody
Yeah.
know? Well, when we and Ryan first started bumping, he figured this out, and he goes, I got to show you something. So he comes over, and we go fishing, and he hands me my Surge Elite, and he goes, here, we're going to go bumping. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So we're out here with these 8-foot, medium, heavy anchor rods, and we're just bumping down the river. And he's catching a couple of fish, and I'm going, man, I'm getting bit all the time. But I was like, they ain't taking the bait. And he's like, oh, I didn't tell you. If you reel down on those and set the hook, you'll catch a fish. They're actually got it in their mouth.
Yeah.
And so about 30 minutes later, I got hit, and I reeled down, set the hook, and I caught the fish. But the thing is, we couldn't feel anything.
No, and you didn't want to arm wrestle us after that summer. Those rods were heavy, and you're holding them all day. I promise you, it would wear you out. But I mean, you don't have to have the best equipment. I mean, that's the great thing about catfish. You can go out there in a 17-foot boat. It's amazing how far we've come with the equipment and technology that we have at our disposal now. I mean, we all want that 26-foot boat. I know I do. I got 2-foot-itis every year. But, this sport is amazing because, I mean, I've gotten my butt kicked in a tournament by a guy in a 16-foot boat. You don't have to have the biggest and best, but it does help to have a really sensitive rod, and nice rods, suited for what you're doing. It's going to increase your catch rate, so it's not mandatory, but it's something that is going to help you if you want to take it to the next level and fish tournaments or start guiding and that kind of thing. So, what else? What's our next topic? I think
we jumped through the whole PowerPoint in that one.
But we're off the PowerPoint. We're in no man's land
that
now.
picture. Talking about that picture.
Hey, we got some pictures. This day right here, I'm gonna tell you, this is side scan. This is back when Humminbird first came out with 1197 here.
That's 1197.
1197, and we were up on Wilson Lake, and this is a picture of a school of bluecat. I still think about at night sometimes. We were pre-fishing. We'd already found our fish, and we found these fish. And I don't know if you can see that, but there's some very large fish in there. And we're in 20 foot of water. We're actually in a feeder creek. And this is another thing we've kind of skipped over is where to find these fish and what we look for. A lot of times in the spring, which is what we were here, water was coming out of this creek, and that has a lot of nutrients, bait fish, crawdads, everything else that these fish like to eat. And these fish moved up in there in a big school, and we anchored up above them. We're like, let's make sure that's what they are.
One fish. Remember, one fish.
Huh?
We were going to catch one and leave.
One fish and leave, and we got our 4th rod out, and all 4 rods were down at the same time. And Jackson broke his off because he's a hook setting fool, man. He'd make Bill Dance proud. But they were all over 40 pounds. And side scan is amazing because when you're going into an area you don't know, it's a great tool to find those ledges and pieces of structure. You can.
All right, we're gonna have a little hula hoop.
Hey, yeah.
Floor.
Let's get it.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, let's go. I'll start getting. We got some T-shirts to give away here. Hula hoop champion. Electronics these days, with the side scan and down scan and all of that, your down scan is going to give you a lot more separate. I like to use them all. Everybody asks me which one you like to use. I use my side scan to find those pieces of structure off, and then I'll go over them with my down imaging and my 2D. And the down imaging, the 2D really gives you kind of a feel of what kind of fish it is for me, and then I get separation with that down imaging to pull it up out of the structure, see how far it is sitting off the bottom, and that kind of thing. But
and once you locate it, you can use your maps to actually dial it in right. That's one of the biggest tools on, I think, my boat is my map. I mean, yeah, everybody can find a tree or something on a side scan, but getting that boat positioned right on that tree or that ledge or those group of fish, the maps these days have came, they're like 3 foot radius now, I think. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're down to where you can put that boat where you want. So there's almost no excuse why you can't get on top of those fish.
And that's a great point. And I mean, it's almost to the point where you have to look at where your fish finder or your GPS, I don't even think we're using pucks anymore, but some of them do have the external pucks. You have to look where that is on your boat if you're in a 24-foot boat and take that into consideration, because I'm using line counter reels. I'm using the Shimano Dakota 5 and 600 line counters, and you want to keep a full spool. That's going to give you more accuracy. If you have a half a spool or something, you're not going to be as accurate with that. But I'm able to anchor up, let's say in front of that structure, I'm 130 foot above, and I'm in 40 foot of water, all right? And I know that my bait's not going back and at a 90-degree angle down to those fish. It's going at a 45-degree angle down to those fish. So I can take that 40 foot of water, cut it in half to 20 foot. You all with me? We don't have anybody taking their shoes off or anything, so I think you all are with me. So I'm at 150 foot back to that structure. We're at 130 foot, 40 foot of water, 45-degree angle, 20 foot. So I always want to be on the short side of that so I can have that current taking that scent back to my fish in the structure, right? So I might be at 130 or what have you, and I'm very accurate to what I'm doing now. That's pinpoint anchoring, all right? That's going to catch you a lot of fish. That's a little trick. All these electronics will do it nowadays. You go over you put a waypoint, and that fish finder will tell you how far you are from that waypoint, all right? And that's one of the biggest tools, especially this time of year in the spring, at night when you're anchoring on flats and things like that. And then also when you're drifting, what you want to do is a lot of times these fish are really tight to the ledges. They're into that structure. So you want to go down, let's say you want to get into tournament fishing. One of the things I can give you advice on is everybody's looking at the same thing. What do you look for when you go to a new body of water? Well, I'm looking on Google Earth. I'm looking for hard bends. There's different things I'm looking for on each bend. Bluffs and things like that are going to tell you, oh, that's deeper water. You've got different kinds of things to look for on straightaways, but without getting too technical here, you look at an area like Osceola down there. It's got these huge sweeping bends through the river.
Deep.
There's gonna be fish living somewhere in that area. That area right there is gonna have a lot of character to it. It's gonna have some really deep water. It's gonna have some fast water, and it's gonna have a lot of breaks, right? So I'm going to go there and I'm going to go down and I'm going to start looking where the fish are. They might be out in the middle of the river. If the river's falling, fish fall out, right? If the river's coming up, a lot of times it's going to put them right into the rocks. So if they're into the rocks or on those ledges, I'm going to go down and I'm going to mark that ledge while I'm pre-fishing. All right, I'm going to mark the whole thing. I'm going to put waypoints all the way down, especially where I'm seeing fish. And I'm going to come back on those waypoints and I'm going to be following that thing tight. And that right there is going to put you in more productive water all day instead of just, we're going to set up here and go down. Another thing you can look for if you don't have the fancy electronics is a seam. All right, a lot of times these fish are going to be relating on seams. You've got a foam line in the river. If y'all know what a foam line is, the river, especially like the Mississippi and the Missouri River, it's a very turbid water. All right, so you're going to have foam on top. And sometimes little pieces of driftwood or dead fish or what have you. And it's all going to be flowing down one side, or it'll be on both sides. There might be a seam on the other side, but all of that stuff kind of congregates in one seam. And those seams are basically feed belts. I mean, those fish know to sit in them because everything that's coming down the river is coming down those things. It's a spot where faster water meets slower water, all right? And they might be just inside the slower water, just inside the faster water, and it's bringing food right to them. So they don't have to waste as much energy. They can sit in a little break right there and have the food come to them. So I look for those a lot. That's something if you don't have, that's always something you want to look for. And, slower water, seams and eddies and things like that is that's what you want to really focus in on Bluecats and the structure as well. Yeah.
And let's talk about, go ahead and flip through a little bit. Let's talk about some river gauges. Go ahead and keep going. So right here, one of the biggest tools that I use before I even leave my house is a river gauge. I know what boat ramp I'm going to use. If my boat ramp's going to be too shallow, too deep, no one wants to show up to a boat ramp and you can't use it. So I know where I'm going. I know what I'm doing. If the water's high, I may not be able to drift. Current may be too much. I may have to get in the slack water, the back water. I may be anchored. So this helps me determine what I'm going to do, where I'm going to do it, and how I'm going to do it. And so one of the biggest tools that I use a lot is a river gauge. I probably look at it too much because it stresses me out a lot, but I look at it a lot. And if you can go ahead and flip forward one more, keep going one more, and one more. This is our gauge in Alton, Illinois. This is my home water. It tells you the dates on a forecast out. It tells you where the river's at, where it's going, where it's predicted to be. It tells you a flood stage. And on this gauge particular alone, I know every level of where I'm at. I know where I can use the certain ramps in the area. I know when the gates are probably going to be open at the dam, if they're going to be running too much water. Or I know if it's dropping, if we're going to be fishing out, or if it's rising, we're going to be fishing in, stuff like that. And this is one of the biggest tools that I probably use that a lot of people don't think about because it's just something no one ever really talks about, in my opinion. But this is one of the things that we use a lot. I mean, me and him are always talking about river levels.
Oh, they're always trying to get us. They're getting us right now. But on your, like I said, on your fall, if we're in that blue part right there, a lot of times your fish are going to suck out. They're going to be moving out towards the middle of the river a lot of times, or out off of the ledges, and they don't want to. Their natural defense is they don't want to get stranded in some backwater as the river falls out. So they're going to move into the river where they feel safe. Because, that water comes up, those fish will get up into the woods and fields, and you can catch them in your backyard if that's where you live. But they don't want to get stuck up there once that water starts leaving. They're going to pull out because everything else is pulling out, and they might be in a drop waiting for that stuff to come up and ambush. They are apex predators. Same thing, that river comes up, you want to start moving up towards the banks, and you can catch them 5 foot off the bank or less. Sometimes it's surprising. You think
you can hear the water splash before your rod goes down.
Yeah. So. But yeah, it's a very good point, Jackson. That's something we live and die by. And, luckily we've got two of the best rivers in the country. We've got the longest river in the country, the Missouri River, and we got the largest by volume, the Mississippi River. And we've got where they meet, which makes our waters up there extremely fertile. We've had 2 previous world records. I don't know what in the heck Kerr or Bugs Island's doing with radioactivity or whatnot, but those suckers are producing some monsters out there. But river levels are insanely important. What else we got?
Keep flipping through. I don't know. We jumped around so much, I forgot.
Is there anything we haven't gone over that you all want to hear about? Yes, sir. Oh.
Go ahead.
That was for today. He's asking about the line down the middle of the graph. That's where we're at today. Yes, sir, and it's projected from there on. Yes, sir. Anybody else? Anything that we haven't discussed yet? Bait.
Yeah, it's on there.
My man.
I think it's coming up.
Oh, man was on top of it. Bait. In the Mississippi River, when the water temperature is below 60 degrees, I'm usually using shad, sometimes moonite, and Asian carp. That's a great bait that time of year. And the reason I believe that to be so is because the shad go down deep. They're usually in the holes with the catfish, in those areas. And I think they're lethargic and a easier prey for them. And then in the spring, the shad go into spawn. They're also an easy target. They're schooled up tight. And then when we start getting above 50 degrees, we start seeing the skipjack show up in our area pretty heavy. Now, right now you could be down in Memphis and using skipjack and catching fish, but up in our area, it's primarily shad, Asian carp, and the occasional mooneye if we can find them. But And what's funny about bait is also you need to pay attention to what cut of bait these fish are keying in on. There'll be a lot of days I'll start off and I'll almost always have my 2 heads on because we've all caught big fish on heads. We got special feelings about them. But I'll catch a few fish in the morning and then all of a sudden I won't get a bite on a head the rest of the day. Now, when it's really cold, one of my favorite cuts is a gut pocket off a big old gizzard. I like to cut that gut out, hook it through there, and I'm going to catch a lot of fish on that, or if they're really finicky, fillets. If they're really not feeding, a big old long fillet is a great cut. And then, the rest of the time, chunks are almost always good, but they might not be biting on heads, and I couldn't tell you why. They just amaze me. You got to think a shad is a shad is a shad, but suckers are finicky, I tell you. So, the cut of the bait, pay attention. Don't have all heads out unless they're really crushing heads that day. and some days I'll have 4 heads on out of 6 poles, you know, but pay attention to what you're doing, put that pattern together. It's all pieces of the puzzle that you need to put together to have that successful day, and don't be surprised if it changes in 20 minutes, because they'll do that to you too. But putting that puzzle together is day in and day out what's going to help you become a more successful fisherman, and these are all little pieces of it. Yes, sir. He's asking if we scale the fish, and no, I don't. I have friends that really believe in scaling the fish. I personally haven't found. Now, I like to fillet them because I get that backbone involved, and I think a lot of times, you know, that makes them bleed a little more, and a lot of people think scoring them up puts a little more scent in the water as well, and I can't argue it. I mean, my buddies who do it, they catch fish. It's not something that I do because I don't like to. I've already got, you know, weeks after I'm done fishing for a little while, I'll still find a scale on me. So, you know, I try to avoid them, you know, but I haven't really noticed a big difference in my personal fishing, but my buddies swear by it. So and sometimes they even like to take a little slice off of that skin, and some of my buddies like to take and beat one side of the fish up to get the blood into the meat. You know, that's one thing that I have done with Asian carp, and it makes that meat a little, you know, a little more ready. It holds that blood in. So,
But there's also a lot that comes to holding that blood in, and it's the quality.
Yeah.
A lot of guys that catch bait do not care of their bait.
Yep.
I can't emphasize enough how important it is to take care of your bait. You lose so much scent, so much blood, all this stuff. If your bait starts getting soft, it doesn't stay on the hook, it's real mushy. I see so many guys down at the dam catching skipjack, and they're throwing them in a 5-gallon bucket, and they leave them there for 2 hours and 80 degrees. Those fish lose everything, and they turn to mush, they bleed out, they lose their scent, and then they go vacuum seal them, and they wonder why they don't work. One of the best things I can say is when you catch your bait, take care of it. There's so many great bait tanks on the market now. There's so many here that are selling bait tanks. You can keep shad alive. I wish we could keep skipjack alive. We ain't got that far yet. Moon eye, you can keep your herring alive. And those are things that you almost can't freeze. I mean, the big gizzards, we have pretty good success with freezing those. But your small shad, your moon eye, they turn to mush. They lose a lot of their scent. It's hard for us to use them. You cut them open, your bait's not bleeding. You're really cutting yourself short because you've lost everything that fish is looking for.
Exactly.
And so.
Exactly. And one of the biggest questions I get from a lot of guys is, hey, Ryan, how do you know your skipjack's fresh? You know, you're buying bait, right? And I buy from T&M Bait Company, and they take very good care. I've seen how they catch them. I see how they preserve them in ice immediately. They flash freeze them. They vacuum seal them. And bait's still going to go bad if you got it in a freezer for too long. And they're like, how do you tell if you've got good or bad skipjack? One thing you'll look for is the cheeks start getting rosy and maroon. If you can put your finger through the gut pocket. And I mean, there's some times a year where you can catch them, put them on ice, and in a day you can put your finger through the gut pocket because they're eating a lot of shad, and it'll just rot out. If you are catching skipjack and putting them away, and it's that time of year where they're gorged on shad, it's not a bad policy sometimes to cut that gut pocket out and throw it, and then vacuum seal your fish, all right? Because that gut pocket will rot that meat out. Another thing you want to look for is when I cut my bait open, is it that dark maroon, reddish, pale color? You want that blood to be bright red, all right? You don't want that. You don't want to be able to smear that meat around either, all right? You want it to be firm, and you know, skipjack should have a shine to them, you know, and kind of iridescent colors on it. So, you know, there's no perfect way to do it. Sometimes, you know, especially if you pack a freezer full, you go down to Kentucky and you're catching a whole bunch, and you pack a freezer full, and the middle's not going to ever freeze, and it's going to be rotten by the time. So take care of your bait. You know, there's a lot of articles online about how to do this, and you know, different things. It's expensive. You spend a lot of time to get it, so take care of it. And fresh bait will catch you more fish. Any other? Yes, sir. This man's asking about Santee Cooper and rattles while we're drifting. Yes, I've been playing around with floats a little bit with rattles, and I've used rattles back in the day with spinner blades and everything else. And I think it's neat that all these new products are on the market, and it definitely, you know, it's something else for us to have in our arsenal. And I think there are times where they do make a difference, and floats are one thing that I know make a difference. I mean, getting that bait up off the bottom is something that will catch you more fish, because like I said, these fish will feed up. And having an option to walk baits back and keeping them 3 to 4 foot off the bottom and over some of the structure and to those fish that are up off the bottom, yeah, definitely, it's going to work. Rattles, on the other hand, I haven't ever seen a day where it's made a difference in my fishing. But I don't use them every day, so I couldn't tell you for certain. But I think it's a nice option, and people are catching them with them, so I don't think it's hurting their fishing. And I'm all for any product in catfishing to grow the sport. So, I think that's a great question, and I'll give this man what size we got here? Extra large. Give you a shirt for that one. So that's one of them topics you try to trip me up on. Everybody's fighting about. I think I handled that one.
What was that? Fish attractants on our bait. No, I don't personally use any fish attractants. I don't know about you if you've ever messed around with that. I mean, I've had some bait that I've cut up. I saw Phil King doing this. I don't know, anybody know who Phil King is? We were fishing a tournament on Wheeler.
Yes, sir.
Remember that? Mm-hmm. And Tim Haney, Phil's partner, was sitting in the front, and I bet he cut 20 skipjack up, and he put them all in Ziploc bags with blood and everything. And I tell him, well, what's this guy doing? It's Phil King. And I asked him, and he said that's how they do their bait. And they soak their bait in that blood all day, and they're pulling bait out of their bag that's cut all day. I still haven't tried it, but I don't use no artificial or anything like that.
A lot of people swear by anise oil, which I think smells like black licorice. I don't have a lot of faith in it. I've soaked old bait. I mean, if you're getting low and they're biting, I've used dead red blood spray, and I've caught some nice fish on it. But I'm soaking, I don't think there's really any substitute for fresh. I just don't. I think if you go into a tournament with good fresh bait like caught recently, my expectations are that much greater. I mean, fresh bait cannot be.
And where we fish at, it really doesn't last that long, because where we're fishing, 90% of the time, we're fishing 2 to 4 mile an hour current. So our bait is getting hammered. So it really wouldn't last that long in our river system we fish. On a lake, you'd probably get away and see better results with it than on a river system.
That's a good point.
Go ahead, I can't hear.
Braid or mono? Braid. If you're in a river and you're not fishing with braid, in my opinion, you are missing the boat. There's so many reasons for it. Mono is more abrasion resistant if you're fishing around rocks. You've got a thicker diameter. But that thicker diameter has also got more drag in the water. Like he said, we're fishing 2 to 6 mile an hour currents. I mean, 6 is pretty tough, but I've been in it. I've caught bluecats drifting at 3.4 miles an hour. They will bite. But when you've got mono and let's say you're using 40-pound test mono, you've got a 40-pound test diameter that is 30 foot down in the water, and you've got all that drag, you've got all that stretch. So you've got less sensitivity, you've got more drag, which means you have to use more weight, and you've got less feel or visual on your rod tip of what's actually going on down there. All right, plus you got to break that stuff off of the current, stretching it 47 feet. But when you got braid, you've got 80-pound, I use 80-pound braid, I got a 16-pound diameter. So I've got a 16-pound diameter, I can use a third of the less weight, and I'm getting the job done. I got more sensitivity. Now, if you're in a lake, you're flathead fishing, you're in the structure, there's places for mono, most definitely. But if you're in a river situation and you're not fishing with braid, you're missing out. Especially if you're back bouncing. Don't ever take mono back bouncing. For the love of, just trust me. Yes, sir. Boat control on the river while drifting, yes, sir, I will. Boat control, I want my boat following, the line that I want to be on. Whether that be inside or outside, I'm lining up on something, and I want to keep that nose pointed upstream. If I'm in the boat, I've got my remote control in one hand. Even if I'm fishing, I've got my rod in the other hand. I am constantly moving that thing. The trolling motor's got autopilot. And a lot of people say it's good enough, and I haven't gotten the new one with Bluetooth, so it might even help me even more. But I am constantly moving the speed up and down, and I'm keeping my boat straight. I don't want the back of that boat walking, here and there. I want it straight, and I want to also be able to avoid barges and everything else, logs and trees coming at me. But boat control is key. It is key out there. And I mean, you can catch them. but it's going to make a big difference in your catch and keeping that speed where you want it. And that's something you got to figure out every day, that speed. Sometimes they're going to want it, starting off, like I said, in the colder water, you might be at 0.7, 0.8. And then in the summertime, you might be 2.2, 2.4. You got to just kind of see what they want. Yes, sir. Sometimes he's asking if the trolling motor sometimes isn't enough. And yes, sometimes you got to bump the motor in gear. And what I do is I trim the motor up to the level I like, because if you bump it in gear, a lot of times it's going to, you're really slowing down. So I'll trim it up to where, the prop's just spinning. You can bump it in gear, and I use the trolling motor to turn the boat, and that'll really slow you down. You got to use a heavier weight.
Go ahead, buddy.
When you're fishing on the Mississippi River and you're fishing 50 foot or more, how do you bring that fish up the right way?
It's a good question.
So the question was, if we're fishing Mississippi River in 50-foot or deeper
There you go,
water,
Mr. John.
are we bringing those fish up slower, or are we bringing those fish up the same rate? And usually, fishing the Mississippi River, you never know what you're going to get. If we're in slack water and we know that we can control the fish, we'll try to do our best. But if we're fishing 50 foot of water and we have even big fish on, you really can't control anything. And bringing those fish up at that fast rate can really mess with our air pocket and really affect the fish. And go ahead and talk about it.
Yeah, another thing you want to do is while you're drifting and you get that big fish on, cut your trolling motor off. All right? I know it sounds like a really simple thing when you think about it, but a lot of people don't. Cut your trolling motor off, and you're not fighting the current and the fish. Because if you're fighting the current, a fish is going to come up out there. If he's a big fish, he's gonna mouth bucket you, where they sit there and open their mouth up. It's like a 5-gallon bucket, and you're going to lose that fish a lot of times. Cut your trolling motor off. You can fight him straight up and down and bring him up slower.
Yeah. And also,
when you're in that deep
anybody know
water.
about burping fish? Anybody ever burp the catfish? That's a big thing that a lot of guys don't think about when fishing deep water. I saw a gentleman a couple years at the Sea Yard tournament on Wheeler. He had a live well, like 180-pound sack, and they were all on their backs and their belly up, and he was like stressing out in the weigh-in line. And I walked up to him and I said, man, those fish look alive, but they look like they're full of air. I mean, their stomach was like a brick wall. Another guy had a burping stick, these PVC tube, about 1/2 inch. He shoved it down their throat. It doesn't hurt them. It released the air pocket in their stomach. All the fish turned right back up on their bellies and were healthy as can be. So most of you guys, if you're fishing the live well and they immediately go belly up, that fish usually has air trapped in its stomach, and you got to release that air by PVC. I've used end of a rod, whatever you can do. It's not going to harm the fish to release that.
Stick your hand down their throat.
Yeah, stick Ryan's hand down its throat. You just shove it down. You'll hear, if you use PVC,
Yeah.
you'll hear the air come out of the pipe actually. But you shove it in there real softly, and you'll hear it like a hose, like an air hose. You'll hear it come out, and his whole stomach will decompress.
Yep.
But you'll know whenever you catch one, their stomach will actually be like a brick wall. You flick it, and it won't even move. So.
Yes, sir.
When you find a lot of good frozen bait companies, like they said, but if you're in a boat and you use it fresh, is there any conditions where you just can't get shad?
Oh, yeah.
Like I know Skipjacks is big smash. What is it?
Yeah, this man's asking if we ever had a problem finding shad, and yes, it used to not be so, but I think the Asian carp compete for the same food, and I think they swim around. They might eat the fry. I don't know, but yeah, our shad populations have definitely taken some hits. We have good years and bad years with them, but yes, there are times when you cannot find. Shad is one of my biggest headaches because I refuse to use frozen shad on my guide trips. I won't do it. I don't want to take your money and take you out there with some janky bait. I'm not going to do it. So I hunt fresh, and I've got a pond behind my house, and I got a pen, and I got to go catch 300-400 of them every week somewhere. And I'm usually driving 2 hours from my house to go to one of the lakes in Illinois and stealing your guys' shad. So that's one of my biggest headaches. But shad's tough, man.
Is that what you'll trim it for? Because you're in the Mississippi River, and I'm like that area when the river area, I'm guessing 5 to 10 years ago, it was full of shad.
Full of shad. Yeah, you walk across them. You can walk across them. I mean, that's the only thing because
Well, a lot of problem is the Asian carp share the same habitat as shad. Slow-moving water. They both eat plankton. And so when you have a fish like the Asian carp that spawns 3 times a year, they're just taking over the shad population. Shad eggs, when the shad are up in the rocks laying eggs, the carp are eating them. We don't get those big gizzards anymore because they just die. They die before they can get it. We catch a little fry. I mean, when was the last time you had a net full of monster gizzards on the Mississippi? A long time.
I got lucky not too long ago.
I don't
But yeah,
wanna
you
hear
don't
about
see
your
them
luck.
very often. I can't lie. It was the
You
other
always
day,
get
but
lucky.
I was like blown back because you don't,
You just don't get it.
No, you don't. Back in the day, I mean, you could go up to Alton, and if there was a creek or anything, I mean, you could catch your shad and go fishing that day. I can't rely on that anymore. So, but good fresh bait. If you want to serious about catfishing, most guys are like, man, now what'd you use? Oh, we had some chicken livers and or we had that shad from Walmart, and I'm not knocking it. I'm sure you all catch some fish on it, but I'm gonna go with that fresh bait. And any more questions out there? Anybody? Everybody satisfied? Did we answer everything?
Man.
What type of anchor? I use the Cat River and the Monster anchors. I usually have 2 or 3 of them in the boat at all times, and I like the ones that break away, that are good for mud and rock. I do have a box anchor that I use for lakes. Jackson, what kind do you use?
I use a never snag anchor.
Yeah. There's so many great companies out there, and they're all going to treat you right, But the anchors, I like something that has a breakaway feature with a chain that you can zip tie, and most of the time get your anchor back, unless you throw it somewhere really dumb like I've done many times.
And if you're going to be on the river, I recommend, if you're anchored on the river, I'd really recommend looking at a good anchor ball. We use them for their yacht buoys, like they tie on the yacht docks about, 24 inches around. And what we do is it ties on the end of our ropes. So if we do hook a big fish and, fast moving current and it's taking line and we cannot stop the fish, we can slowly unhook it off our front of our boat, our anchor, let the line out, and we throw the ball, and the anchor still stays set, but you know where the end of your rope's at, so you're not getting that caught in your outboard when you're going back. I don't know how many times this has saved us from losing a big fish because we simply would have not got the fish in the boat if we did not throw the anchor and chase the fish actually down.
If you're in a tournament situation, you have to have one if you're anchor fishing in current, and throw the ball on a 20-pound fish. You don't want to be the guy who's like, I can get him in, and you don't.
Listen to your partner.
That partner gets yelled at, and he's not a good dude. But another thing, when you got that anchor ball in that current, man, baby that line out. Don't just throw the ball and let her go, all right? Because that rope might have, 30 foot or something. Don't just throw a bunch of rope out. That stuff will drift downstream. If that gets in your prop and that anchor's still hung, it's going to turn your boat around and it'll go down faster and you know what to even do with it. I know guys, been captains on the river driving tugboats that have done it, and that's how most boats get sunk out on the river, is they get that rope and that prop. So a good anchor ball and feed that line out until you throw the anchor ball physically. That's a good partner. A good partner doesn't sink your boat. All right, so always do that. But that is one great tool while you're out there fishing in the river, but it's also very dangerous. Also, when you can use it to pull the anchor. What you do is you got the ball in the water, you tie the rope off to the cleat, and you drive out away from it, and that ball will slide down towards the anchor, and it'll pull the anchor up. It's a great tool if you're fishing fast water by yourself. And there's days you can't physically pull it because you're in 3 to 4 mile an hour current. So that anchor ball will pull it. But it's also, if that rope gets back and gets in your prop, your boat's going down. Always have your life jacket on. Always be safe when you're out there using your anchor ball. That's everybody I know who sunk a boat sunk it that way, except for Jackson.
Hey, we don't talk about that.
We won't talk about that. That was in his misspent youth, though. So, but any other questions? Yes, sir. What's that? Planer boards? He's asking how I feel. Planer boards are great. They're something that's been around for a while. I've been using them for years. On the river, I don't use them a lot because they're kind of a pain in the butt, to take off, but they catch fish. When the fish are on them, there's times in the Mississippi River where we'll be in 50 foot of water, and this usually happens in late June, August. A lot of times these fish in the slower water in the river, they'll come up. Guys catch them jugging on the river all the time. Been in 50 foot of water and caught them 6 foot down on planer boards, getting them away from the boat. It's a great tool in shallow water. It's something that you can put in your arsenal that'll let you get more rods out and a wider spread. If you're in shallow water, sometimes those fish spook from the boat, and you can actually drive them towards the planer boards while you're dragging. They're a great tool. Every cat fisherman should have them if you're gonna be on lakes and sometimes rivers. It's another tool in your arsenal to catch you more fish. At times. Now, Ohio River. We fished monsters on the Ohio. And we were in an area with a lot of guys, there's enough current to drift. It was flowing at maybe 1 mile an hour. We were pulling our baits up river at 0.7.
It's got to be a real low current
Yeah.
situation to do, because the current will take your lines the opposite way.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And one more thing I want to touch on, guys, before we get out of here, is conservation. I don't know how many of you guys are aware of what's going on in the Ohio River right now, but it's absolutely sickening what's going on out there. I fished the Ohio River probably 10, 15 years now, and I can barely get myself to go back there. The commercial fishermen, the pay lakes, a lot of these guys are taking these fish out, selling them to pay lakes, and it's really hurting what's going on in the Ohio River. The tournament results show it. The guys that live there, their results show it. It's really sad. So anybody, I beg you all to please keep releasing these fish over 20 pounds. We are fighting this battle. It's a rough battle. It's a lot of legal, a lot of money involved, and we're not doing very well right now. The more it takes of you guys helping us out, the better it's going to be. Because I really don't, after what I've seen they've done to the Ohio River in 10 years, the Mississippi River, they're attacking the James River right now. Wheeler Lake's been hit. It's not something that can replenish itself at a rate they're taking them at. So I beg you guys to preach that to your friends, your co-workers, even people you fish with. Take a picture of that big fish, let it go, let them big genetics get back in that water. Keep 10 5-pounders. The amount of quality fish on a big blue is not that much. I mean, a 50-pound fish, you may get 10 pounds of meat out. I think you get all the red meat out of it. If some guys want to eat red meat, that's up to you. There's ways to catch multiple fish that are smaller in size, better tasting, and the genetics are not, those big fish, not every fish gets 50 pounds. Not every big whitetail gets 200 inches. There's a reason why we have 140-pound fish and why there is records, because those are rare species that we have in our water system.
Oh yeah, I get this question a lot. I practice selective harvest with my guide service. Anything over 10 pounds goes back. And people are like, why? I want to keep that big fish. And the reason being is, you want to catch that big fish, right? Well, I can't guarantee a lot of things in this world. I can't guarantee if we let him go, anybody ever catch him again, if he'll even live. But I've caught enough of them that have been caught before to know that catch and release does work. But one thing I can guarantee you is if you keep him, nobody will catch that fish again. And these larger fish, they build up more mercury and see these chemicals in their soft tissues that you're ingesting that are harmful. And the smaller fish they're lived in that water system less time and have built up less of those toxins. There's less waste in killing the small fish. So let the big ones go, take a picture. That's my, you guys do what you want to do. I'm just up here on my soapbox preaching. Let the big ones go. Keep the small ones, and there'll be more big fish to catch. They'll make more little ones, and we'll keep eating those because I love eating. But you all have been a great. Yeah, we'll take one more. Yes, sir. What do you got? Did you have a question? Oh, I thought you were either bidding on something or had a question. But I can't thank you all enough for coming and watching us up here talking. You've been great, and thank you.